Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. This is the 26th episode of the Clements Bookworm, and I'm Angela Unk, Director of Development at the Clements Library. I just want to let you know that today's meeting will be recorded to share online, and this afternoon you will receive an email with the recording and any resources mentioned in today's broadcast. Just a quick tutorial in case you're joining us for the first time and or haven't used Zoom a lot. You'll notice that we welcome your participation in chat. We like to think of this as a very interactive time where we gather together. So please continue to chime in and select all panelists and attendees so that we can all see your comments. You'll notice though that the conversation goes by very quickly. So because of this, we ask you to put your questions into the Q&A section. There you can also give a little thumbs up, which upvotes other people's questions if it's one that you also have and would like to move it to the top of the queue. And if you have any answers or comments related to someone's question, you can comment there and it all stays together with that one question. In addition, please note that as part of our diversity, equity, and inclusion program, we do have the auto transcription turned on today. If you don't need that service and would like to toggle it off, you can do so. Again, on that little bar, you'll see the option to do that. And you can also change the font size there. My colleagues Ann Bennington-Helber and Tracy Palovich will be monitoring the chat and providing helpful links and answering any comments or questions provided there. But once again, put your questions for the panelists in the Q&A section. I also have side-by-side turned on so that you can change the amount of your screen that shows the slides versus the person. And I think I finally figured out how to make the person a little thumbnail so that if you don't want to see them, you can also minimize that and move it around so that they're not blocking any of the slides for you. So with all of that, I will move on to say that the Clements Bookworm is brought to you by the William L. Clements Library on the campus of the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. The Clements Library enables the discovery, learning, and teaching of American history through the collection, conservation, digitization, and availability of primary sources on paper. All right, so we've been asking for for people to sponsor our bookworm programs, and today's episode is generously sponsored by Robert and Jean Julier. Thank you so much, Bob and Jean. We really appreciate your sponsorship. We've been having a poll question this morning. If you want to click on it quickly, you can do so. Asking if you can name 4 women artists, illustrators, or cartoonists, and of course, share those names in the chat if you have them. And we're hoping that if not, after this program, you'll be able to name some. So I'm going to end the polling and share the results. And we have 25% of the people said yes, and 75% said no, but maybe after this presentation I can. So thanks so much for participating in that and sharing some of your favorite names in the chat. Today, we welcome author and exhibit curator of Drawn to Purpose, American Women Illustrators and Cartoonists, Martha Kennedy, who will be in conversation with Professor Phoebe Gleckner from the University of Michigan's Stamps School of Art and Design. Martha Kennedy is a curator of popular and applied graphic art in the Prints and Photographs Division of the Library of Congress, where she has curated exhibitions of cartoon and illustration art and developed the library's collections of graphic art. The project she will discuss today, Drawn to Purpose, won the 2019 Eisner Award for Best Comics-Related Book. Martha has been with the Library of Congress for nearly 20 years, and before that was a curator at the Great Plains Art Collection. Martha, we're so pleased to have you here today. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you so much for this invitation. I am honored and I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you to you and Anne and all the others who've made this program possible. And I'd like to thank Phoebe for being willing to guide this conversation today.
Thank you, Martha. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you. So speaking of Phoebe, Phoebe Gleckner is a graphic novelist, artist, and past Guggenheim Fellow. Her books have been published in multiple languages, and her artwork has been exhibited in galleries and museums across the United States and Europe. Thank you so much for being here. Even though it's the end of term, I'm sure you've been really busy, but we're thrilled to have you. And I'd like to invite you to kick things off.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. It's really great to be part of this conversation. Being an illustrator and a cartoonist myself, I find your book fascinating. And being a professor at the University of Michigan, I can see in the future that your book could be a good resource for my students and for myself. So I teach classes in cartooning, illustration, and narrative. Narrative is a topic that runs through all my classes. And of course, cartooning at least is a narrative form, and then illustration can be looked at as either a narrative form or something that is more redundant of existing information presented in text. I mean, you can look at it many ways. And so I'd really like to know, Martha, what inspired you to take a deeper look at the collection at the Library of Congress of artists who were working as illustrators and cartoonists, particularly women? What was it that caught your interest initially?
Oh, initially, just learning about the collections as I started working at the library and getting a sense that there were large bodies of work by women illustrators and cartoonists that I felt were not receiving the kind of attention and appreciation and study that they merited. And then learning a little bit about their lives, both those factors really inspired me. And then also feeling increasingly that there was a need to do a book and exhibition focusing on women in these fields, because I felt that there had been a lot of wonderful books and illustration about the histories of cartooning and illustration in recent years, but I felt like women weren't given their due in a number of them. And the library has a critical mass of work by women in these fields. And although it isn't complete or exhaustive, I felt like there was really a good case to be made for doing a book and exhibition like this, and to make special efforts to acquire women's work in these fields. And this is an effort that's ongoing. It will go on, I hope, by future curators as well. So that's kind of a long answer, but
Oh, no, but excellent. Well, congratulations on the publication of your book. It's been so well received. I'm really happy to see that.
thank
And
you.
yeah, so I guess this is a time where we ask you to start your presentation and tell us more about the book.
Okay, maybe we can go on to the next slide or two. We'll see. So this gives me an opportunity just to make the point that this took many years, and also it required a lot of support and encouragement from my colleagues, and mainly my colleagues in the prints and photographs division where I work, and but also across the library, and the library's publishing office, the exhibits office, sister and brother curators. So I just want to thank, express my appreciation to them, because without this kind of support from them and from friends and family, the project would never have been completed. So let's see, maybe moving on. Yeah. Ways that the book and exhibition are closely related. I just show this slide to make the point that the designs for an organization of the book and exhibition were really well coordinated. We had very tight turnaround times for production of the exhibition and the book. And the coordination was sort of a happy accident. And I was really pleased, all of us were pleased that we could kind of use a diagonal element in both the exhibit design and in the book, chapter headings and also the book cover and so on. The other, this slide also makes the point that in terms of content, very closely related, the major sections of the exhibition correspond pretty closely to the major chapters in the book. This slide shows a detail of one work, one artwork from each of the major sections in the book. So a little bit, moving on, a little bit about the history. I began thinking about this project really about 8 years after I began working at the library. I wrote my first book proposal in 2009. And although supervisors and colleagues were supportive, it took quite a few years to make Drawn to Purpose a reality. And I even sort of decided on that main title early on. I show this slide just to share covers of two book proposals later on to make the point, sort of, I hope, give you the sense that the project expanded once it was approved. So as I said earlier, the original art primarily was the main inspiration, and learning about the lives. And I want to show a series of slides now of works by women artists whose both work and lives were touchstones for me, major inspirations. Here is a slide showing Rose O'Neill and one of her amazing comics, really rather a rare Sunday strip of her Pupies comics. It dates from 1935, and it really, I think, shows off her lush, detailed drawing style. She stands out as such a success story. She did, in addition to comics, she also did illustration during the golden age of illustration. And she was not unusual, I don't think, in that respect, because I think a number of cartoonists also did some kinds of illustration too in order to make livings. So next slide, please. I think we want to focus. Oh gosh, this is so hard. I'm sorry, it's hard to see. But I wanted to make the point, one of the amazing things about that Sunday strip is that she wrote very detailed notes in the borders to her colorist. And this fact, I think, shows how real the world of Pupies were to her. And I think if you don't mind, I might read a little bit of this, the instructions she addressed to Miss Hess, because I just think they're amazing and really kind of inspiring. Dear Miss Hess, I'd like to experiment with rich moonlight in this. I'm sure you will know how to make it a success. Moonlighting panels 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I suppose we'll have to leave our cupies pink as usual, or they might be lost. Long panel 2 and 3. Daylight scene, rich blue sky, fading into pink above trees, cream ground, lavender shadows, foliage, rich green over black, plain flower pink, ruffle flowers blue outside rim, orange centers. And that's probably enough, but she goes through sort of frame by frame, letting Miss Hess know what she'd like to see, how she'd like to see this comic strip looks when it's printed. So let's go on to the next slide. So during her career, O'Neill worked for 12 years for Puck magazine, which mainly targeted male readers. And I just want to show a couple of examples here. During that time, she produced over 700 illustrations. And they include this wonderful pro-woman suffrage cartoon you see on the left. She uses her cupies to campaign for women's suffrage. And on the right, an example of a cover design. We know she did at least 5 cover designs for Puck. And I think this one's interesting because it features June brides. None of them look very happy. She was married and divorced twice, and perhaps that colored her perspective on the subject.
I just want to interject, Martha. It's really amazing that the Cupies characters by Rose O'Neill had enjoyed such a resonance with the general public, and that they also inspired a full product line, mostly dolls, which, you know, was made decades after the strip ended. It continued, and they were extremely popular. And I did a quick internet search, and it seems that the Kewpie name and the image of the Kewpie is still being used today on products, and most notably a Japanese brand of mayonnaise, which can be purchased lots of places. So that's kind of amazing. I don't know if they had to get the copyright from the O'Neill estate or not, but, or if it's out of, wouldn't it be out of,
yeah, it might be public domain. Yeah.
Public domain. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, wonderful.
Oh, it's really, it's amazing. Her story and career are really pretty incredible. And she was much beloved, really. I think, there was one other point I was going to make about that. Never mind. Go ahead.
One more question. When you were showing the notes about the color, I wondered if the color version of that strip is still existing. Does it exist?
I haven't found it. I would love to see the color version of it, and that would be great. I mean, yeah, that's
maybe one day someone will find it.
Maybe someday someone will find it, or or one of us can do a search. I can, to see if we can find it. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. That's terrific. Maybe we should move on to the next slide of the next illustrator. Elizabeth Shippen Green was another very successful illustrator during the Golden Age, and she was well known during her lifetime, much less known now. I show 2 works here that give a sense of the range of her work. On the left, we see the heroine of a short story, who is named Giselle. And I think it's interesting to show her because, among other things, she fits the feminine ideal of the time in her overall look and clothing and so on. She looks very much like a Gibson girl. And on the right, this is an illustration she did that Elizabeth Shippen Green did a few years later. And it's a different kind of illustration for a different kind of short story. Um, it's for a short story set in the past, sort of popular historical fiction. And her treatment of the scene showing noble male figures from the past, a herald closest to us, um, and the way she uses vivid color and her vantage point, looking at the figures, depicting them from below, creates a really dramatic, bold kind of composition that recalls to me the style and approach that we see that's typical of Howard Pyle, who's a very legendary illustrator and teacher. And he was also Green's teacher. Now, here's another interesting example of Green's work. She created this illustration to accompany a poem that was published in Harper's. And by the way, she had an exclusive contract with Harper's Magazine, which was pretty unusual for women illustrators during that time. So she took a line from this poem, used it as her title, Life Was Made for Love and Cheer, and drew on her own life for inspiration in this illustration. I pulled out a detail to show that she includes a small self-portrait and depictions of two of her colleagues, Jessie Wilcox Smith and Violet Oakley. And they are shown on the grounds of the Red Rose Inn, which was a commune-style home that the three of them shared outside Philadelphia. The three of them were known as the Red Rose Girls. This living arrangement was rather unconventional for women illustrators at that time. And here Green is celebrating their friendship, their professional success, and life together. To me, this seems a really interesting early example of an illustrator purposely incorporating a slice of autobiography into her work. So maybe we could move on. Yeah, Jessie Gillespie took a very different, rather different career path than Green and many Golden Age peers. Much less is known about her, but she remained single and independent for her life. We know that for sure from her niece and what biographical information I could find. Her work stands out for showing humor in some examples and also just sheer beauty. The drawing on the left may have been for an advertisement. This is a kind of work that many illustrators did in order to earn livings. Gillespie also created very fine silhouette art, which was an unusual specialty. And the example on the right, I think, shows a sense of humor on her part.
Oh, and Martha, if I must say that the series of silhouettes is also a wonderful example of wordless narrative. I mean, so simple in its presentation, but it's really telling a full story of this woman looking at herself and then looking in the paper and then realizing she needs some accessories and she's going to go out and get, I mean, who knows what she's doing? I don't know what the article said, but it's telling us a story.
Yeah. It's terrific. And we have some more examples of her silhouette art in the library's collections too, just as another point. Let's move, yeah, great. This pair of drawings highlights changes in popular imagery of women. We have a Vanity Fair cover on the left by Ethel Plummer, which features a really modern type of feminine ideal that I think we could see emerging even in the previous slide by Gillespie. We see slender figures who convey a strong consciousness of fashion, and they also reflect the growing presence of women in public spaces on the avenue. They are out to see and be seen. 14 years later, Anne Harriet Fish, who was also another Vanity Fair cover artist, highlights the growing vocational aspirations of young women in this piece. It's a double-page spread that was published in Cosmopolitan magazine. And you can see it's even entitled Careers for Our Girls, a High Flyer. Um, she made this, she created this piece not long after Amelia Earhart became the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. So images in this slide, compared with some of the figures in the preceding slides, I think reflect changes in the roles of women in society as they venture further and further outside the domestic sphere. We can move on. Here are comics by two groundbreakers, African-American cartoonists. And we see Jackie Orms, an example of her work, on the left, and Barbara Brandon Croft on the right. Brandon Croft cites Jackie Orms as an inspiration for her comic called Where I'm Coming From. Orms published her first comic that was called Torchy Brown, From Dixie to Harlem, in 1937, and this was in the Pittsburgh Courier. In it, she introduced a groundbreaking character, a career-oriented Black woman also looking for romance. This example of Torchy and Heartbeats, which was Orms's fourth and last comic, is a refined revival of her first strip. And I make a big point about this because Orms is really important in the history of women in the comics. She's important for introducing a strong female character into an adventure strip. And she did this 3 years before Gail Messick basically did the same thing in 1940 when she published her groundbreaking comic, Brenda Starr Reporter, that undoubtedly some of you know of. And Brandon Croft became the first nationally syndicated Black female cartoonist when Universal Press syndicated her comic in 1991. Her characters discuss relationships, race, identity, history, social and political issues as well. And these are topics that are not often found in 1990s comics. She also helped broaden the scope of comics. Maybe we can move on. Great. Leaping ahead. These three graphic artworks are by three different illustrators. From left to right, Sue Coe, Melinda Beck, and Anita Coons. And they, to me, show what strong messages editorial illustrations can deliver. I believe this type of art should receive more study and appreciation. The images by Beck and Coons comment directly on the quandaries and challenges of being female in the 1990s and early in 2000. The mourning figure in the foreground of Coe's scene appears to be a woman and recalls similar grieving figures in works by Kate Kollwitz, another artist celebrated for her fierce indictments of the war. Can we move on, please? Anita Coons created these three illustrations of highly varied subjects. They include a self-portrait, a magazine illustration, and a cover design for the New Yorker. Collectively, they show her ability to successfully execute quite different, challenging kinds of illustration. Coons created Hands as a conceptual response to an article about the global AIDS epidemic and possible treatments and cures for the disease. I think it's easy to infer multiple meanings from this metaphorical image. The cluster of hands of different sizes and colors underscores the point that AIDS affects people of all races and ages, and the miraculous rays of light that the hands reach toward signal hope. Coons's painting technique, especially her handling of light and color and treatment of naturalistic detail, reminds some viewers of paintings by Flemish school painters of the early Renaissance. And I think you get a sense of that in her self-portrait when you consider the technique and the format that she's chosen for it. Of course, there are modern aspects to it too. She shows herself with no clothing and has a very distinctive, unwavering gaze. In the cover design for the New Yorker, she seems to speculate on the fate of American liberty at the start of the 21st century. And this was well before the terrorist attacks of September 11th. Here she produces overall, she produces thought-provoking work that sometimes relate to women, but also relate to other issues and themes that affect everyone. Moving on, a few more inspirations. We have work by political cartoonists. Here are examples by Ann Telness and Ann Mergen. Telness is well known. She is a multiple award winner in her field, and Mergen is too little known. In this example by Telness, she, I think, has created a beautifully balanced composition. You see balance between the main figures, the setting, and decorative detail. And this cartoon at first, I think, appears to celebrate the Massachusetts Supreme Court ruling in 2003 that gay couples have the right to marry. But she also uses dry humor in this cartoon to make the point that the traditional view of marriage between a man and a woman has resulted in second-class citizenship for many people in America for a long time. Mergen addresses apathetic voters in her cartoon. It shows staggering numbers of people lined up for the circus, the Orange Bowl, and the theater, and just two lonely voters at the voting booths. Between 1933 and 1956, well over 20 years, Mergen worked as the editorial cartoonist for the Miami Daily News during a time when few, if any, women held such jobs. In addition to foreign and domestic politics, Mergen covered voting and other issues that she considered vital to civic welfare. Let's move on. Here we see the opening pages for a story in Linda Berry's signature work, 100 Demons. We see her remarkable, innovative, insightful approach to portraying her own childhood as she resurrects and transforms her memories of smells that she remembers from that time. Berry invented the term autobioffictionalography to describe the hybrid nature of her multi-layered, multimedia approach, and it's really quite dazzling, I think. She is the creator of long-running comics and award-winning graphic narratives. She teaches aspiring cartoonists to write and draw at the University of Wisconsin. For years, she created and published comics outside the mainstream, and in recent years has received major honors. Next slide, please. Alison Bechtel is another very talented cartoonist who worked for years outside the mainstream and also has won a huge following and major honors. She and Linda Berry are both MacArthur Genius Award recipients. In this example from Bechtel's strip, Dykes to Watch Out For, that ran 25 years, her characters voice a scathing litany of harmful attitudes toward women's body image, birth control, and self-esteem, which are culturally embedded attitudes, mainly by men. While this is a strongly feminist strip, it shows that Bechtel has created a cast of mostly lesbian characters who are very engaging and memorable individuals whose lives reflect universal concerns. They are not stereotypes, and in this respect, Bechtel has also made a big contribution to comics about women. In this mini comic, Lily Carré captures altered states of being in eye-catching vignettes that show dreaming and waking. Considering that many mini comics tend to be black and white photocopies, hers to me is a deluxe example. It is a sophisticated, limited edition, two-sided silkscreen. Her male narrator in the upper side relates a dream encounter with a woman mysteriously familiar yet unidentified. The verso shows the character after awakening. Carré was trained and is based in Chicago. She's versatile. She creates graphic narratives, online comics, and animations. Next slide, please. We're getting close to the end here. Jillian Tamaki is a rising star in comics and illustration today. In addition to her comics and web comics, she has done book and editorial illustration. You can see portrait drawings she's done of authors in every Sunday New York Times book review. For example, she's illustrated graphic novels and children's books most recently. On the left, we see a scene she drew for the award-winning graphic novel This One Summer that was written by her cousin, Mariko. Here she shows the two preteen protagonists swimming underwater. And to me, their forms suggest their traits of personality. And in the other drawing, which is entitled Now and Then and When, she approaches a traditional theme in the history of illustration, really popular illustration, the ages of woman from cradle to grave. And if we go on to the next slide, hope you can see it a little bit better, some of it anyway. She approaches this traditional theme in a unusual personal way by showing herself as this central monumental figure. And then on the left, she shows herself from infancy to adulthood, and on the right, from middle age to elderly. Her autobiographical approach, in my mind, ties in and reminds me of how autobiographical and semi-autobiographical approaches in graphic narrative and comics have brought us so many powerful stories over decades, and especially today. And let's move on to the next slide. I think this quote is really interesting. Cecilia Beau, who was a very successful portrait painter, a contemporary of John Singer Sargent, and not nearly as well known, but very successful, made this statement in 1915, so over 100 years ago. And I'd just like to share it with you and ask you to think about it, and think about how it relates to today. And then the next slide, please. Here I have listed some resources offered by the Library of Congress about illustration in general, and women illustrators and cartoonists as well. And then one more slide, please. Those were probably put in the chat, I believe. Just a few more thoughts. My hope and my colleagues' hope are many relating to this book. We hope that Drawn to Purpose will spur further research on, interest in, and appreciation for the work of women in these important fields of art. And we also hope that this will encourage you to explore the Prints and Photographs Division's collections, and you can see quite a bit, not all of the 16 million images that the division holds, but quite a few have been digitized and are in the Prints and Photographs online catalog. And with that, thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and I'm very happy to take questions from Phoebe and others. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Martha. That was really wonderful, really wonderful. And I just want to say that, you've presented such a broad history, really taking things from, the last couple hundred years. And, or did you have a time limit on the book? I mean, what is the period limited to the last 100 years?
Oh gosh, I mean, the book does not give comprehensive coverage of women in these fields all the way back, but I mean, I do start with Fanny Palmer in a way, who was really a mainstay of Courier and Ives, and her work, I mean, her name should be better known, and there's a wonderful new monograph out about her, but her work was hung in many living rooms and dining rooms across America in the latter half of the 19th century. So I'm going to start with her and then come as close to the present as possible. And it's not possible to do justice to all, certainly even all of the women illustrators and cartoonists in our collections. But there's such a wonderful critical mass in the library's collections, and we are continuing to collect and will into the future.
That's wonderful. It's really wonderful. I mean, it must have been very difficult for you to make choices because after all, when you're, curating such an important exhibit and you're, writing an important book, you almost have a moral obligation to really think these things through, because the choices you make, in essence, may determine who persists in the minds of future generations.
Boy,
It's a
yes,
huge
I mean
responsibility.
it was rather daunting, I have to say, but I feel, like I said earlier, I felt like it was an important thing to do, and the library's collections are wonderful. There are gaps. In making selections, I did try to reflect the strengths of the library's holdings, and also did have these major criteria in mind too. I wanted to see certain themes highlighted, the way women are depicted by women and girls early on, over time, how gender relations are reflected over time as well. And also sort of show the gradual opening up of subjects and genres that women were permitted to contribute to. And it's I think there's sort of a renaissance in the field right now, because there are so many gifted women in these fields who are creating incredible work, and they're free to handle, address, and engage with any subjects they choose to, really.
Yes, certainly. It opens up a lot of possibilities. And speaking of possibilities in the contemporary world of illustration and cartooning, many artists nowadays are working digitally, or, or they start on paper, but then they scan it and all the color and other details are added digitally. So when I think of your collection of works on paper, would these works even be considered works on paper if the only way to archive them is digitally, unless you printed them out? I mean, how will future curators and collectors at the Library of Congress consider work that is solely digital, produced digitally?
Well, we are collecting work that is born digital, and I would point out that there are still a lot of artists in these fields who are working in sort of a hybrid fashion. Sure. They are doing drawings on paper and then adding color, shading digitally. And so, the final artwork does end up being digital. But we think it's important to collect the drawing and sort of show the process too. But born digital work is being collected. It's something that is, the library is evolving ways of handling, in photography, fine art prints, as well as cartoon and illustration art.
And then I assume like interactive books and things like that. How do you preserve those? I mean, that's another issue, because the vehicle on which you see these things, is constantly being upgraded. And in 10 years, you can't see a book that was actually made for digital interaction. You can't read it now. I mean, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, the issues are complicated.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I think Angela, weren't we going to open it up to questions
Yeah.
from the audience now?
So I see that some people are also putting some questions in the chat as well. And I'll just remind everybody, if you would be so kind as to put your questions in the Q&A section, that just helps us keep organized and make sure that we get to them all. So please go ahead and put your questions there. And I am just going to do a couple of quick wrap up slides while everybody gets their questions posted, and then we'll answer them all. So I want to mention that we will continue to host the Bookworm in the new year. It will continue on the third Friday of every month at 10 a.m. Eastern. And we'll be pleased to welcome Shanna Klein on January 15th to talk about her book, The Fruits of Empire. So you can join us again at that time. Now that if you're new to the Bookworm, it is a series, and once you're registered, you stay on the list unless you choose to leave. So you will receive a reminder for next month's Bookworm. And if you're unable to join us at that time, you will receive an email with the recording on that Friday afternoon. Speaking of which, today you'll receive an email with the recording and resources mentioned. And if you have missed previous episodes of the Bookworm, they can all be found on our website. I'd also like to mention, again, thank you, Robert and Jean Julier, for sponsoring today's episode of the Bookworm. If anyone is interested in sponsoring future episodes, you can reach out to me or to Ann Bennington Helber. And just in case you are looking for a unique gift for the holidays, I'd like to draw your attention to our relatively new Adopt a History piece of history program. It's a fun site to look at, even if you aren't going to make an adoption, because it gives you an idea of some of the work that the library is doing. And there are a lot of options for how you can arrange your online book plate so that you can adopt in your own name, adopt in memory or in honor of someone. So maybe check that out as well as a fun option for sponsoring our work, as well as potentially making a unique gift during the holidays. All right, let me just end my share, and we'll see what wonderful questions we have from people today. All right.
Oh, how kind.
Rex is asking, let's see, would there have been a parallel between the heyday of postcards with some of the cartoon subjects, which was just after the turn of the 19th century for maybe 15 to 20 years? And I don't know. So do you want to address that, Martha?
Yeah. There might have been. I'm not one of the curators who works a lot with the postcard collection, but I know I've seen examples of humorous postcards, and the library has a lot of photographic postcards as well, that aren't simply documentary. So, but a lot of documentary ones as well too. That's an interesting question.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, and I don't know if Clayton Lewis is on today from the Clements or any of the other wonderful art historians and curators, but if anybody else has comments about that, we'd love to have you weigh in. Jane has a related question because she's thinking about the relationship between these mainly printed pieces and what you might have seen women producing in their daily lives, such as sewing, folk art, vernacular drawings. Do they inform each other? Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, they could. It's interesting. I'm trying to think of examples of these women artists sort of from the past who might have done both. Um, it One thing that I do know, Jillian Tamaki does embroidery and created some embroidery pieces that were used to illustrate Black Beauty, I believe, and maybe even some other titles. It would make sense that some women have, done these kinds of wonderful pieces of sewing and other kinds of work that is, quote, practical and useful.
Right, right. Yes. Um, sounds like some more research projects for someone down the way too,
Definitely. Yeah.
to look at those interviews. Let's see. So Tom is wondering, is there a direction that we can anticipate toward how the illustrations of women will continue to change and be integrated with the larger body of artwork?
Wow. Okay. It's hard to anticipate the future. I think it'll be interesting to see if some women might form collectives. I know there are some interesting collectives of poster artists, very busy right now, creating wonderful bodies of work responding to current issues, for example. Um, I know that some women illustrators and cartoonists would prefer not to be looked at as a group. But on the whole, the ones I've spoken to have welcomed my book and have welcomed increased attention. Um, so yeah, I mean that's an interesting question and one
Right.
that's really hard to answer.
It is, it is.
Maybe Phoebe has some thoughts on that.
Oh, good idea. Yeah, Phoebe, do you have some ideas?
On, can you state the question again? Will women artists?
How,
What direction? Yeah.
yeah, what direction will they continue? How will they continue to change and be integrated into the larger body of artwork?
And you're talking artwork in general, fine art. Are you asking whether or not illustration and cartooning will be considered fine art, or are you asking how women will change those fields in particular in the future?
Well, that is a good question, but if you have thoughts on either, and then maybe Tom, if you have a perspective that you most want answered, if you could chime in the chat or back in the Q&A.
Yeah, well, my hope is that one day we'll recognize that male, female, black and white, any kind of adjective that we, attach to a person, we'll realize that those are indeed secondary characteristics. We're all human. We're all here by accident. It's none of our doing, and we're damn lucky to be here. And we're all people. And one day we won't need all these subdivisions, female artists, black artists, whatever. And so my hope is that, yes, women will continue to create art, to do illustration, cartooning, but one day it won't be necessary to look at their particular contributions in a way that's segregated. I mean, there aren't, at one time in my career, I was thinking, God, I'm going to write a book. It's going to be called Important White Male Cartoonists Throughout the History of Cartooning. But it was kind of a joke because, everyone else needs a book like that except the white male, the cartoonists.
Yeah.
So if we can all get to that status where, we don't need those adjectives. And we're all just working, we're working well. And anyway, yeah.
I agree with you. I think it would be wonderful, and I really hope that that happens. And I hope it doesn't take 1,000 years, like Cecilia Beau seemed to think, in her quotation.
Yeah, I mean, it could
Yeah.
take 1,000 years, or it could just be a pipe dream. But anyway.
Well, no, it's something to.
Mhm.
I hope everybody can work toward.
Yeah, definitely. So, let's see. Nancy says thank you to both of you and says, in our newspaper comic strips, such as the Ann Arbor News twice weekly, why is there no storytelling, do you think? Why are the strips and cartoons mostly one-shot jokes?
That's interesting. I look at the Washington Post every day, so I can't really speak to that particular newspaper, but we do have, I mean, we used to have more, and we used to have more real estate given to comics in the newspaper. And I lament that, we don't have more space given to them. But most of the ones we have are narrative. There are a number of one-shot ones, but they don't outnumber the strips, the true strips in our paper. And I can't speak to other newspapers. There's so much that's online now, and I think a lot of people get their comics that way, more so than maybe looking at their particular daily newspaper, either in print or online. I mean, those are my thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that many of the cartoons that you see in the newspaper, it's true, there's not enough real estate to have a whole bunch of different things. And one commenter mentioned Prince Valiant, which is a serialized story. I mean, it's a little bit of it is told every day, and that was once a very popular way of keeping readers reading every day and buying newspapers. But we don't see that so much anymore, unfortunately. I think a lot of cartoons in newspapers nowadays are responding to specific events in current politics or whatever, and so they're more commentary rather than attempting to tell a story about those things.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Yeah, and there are a lot of narrative cartoons on the web in the form of web comics.
Yeah,
which is
definitely.
really interesting to see, and they are serialized. There's lots of those.
Yeah, and sometimes they get published as books too. Just throw that in.
Yeah.
Collections of them. Yeah.
Nice. So I guess, Phoebe, for those who don't know, how do you find those on the web? What's the
Oh my God.
look by author, or is there some?
Well, just type in web comics. I mean, there's a bunch of different different hosts that will make those available, and then it's almost like there was at one time a site called Deviant Art, I don't know, which is very popular, and individual artists would start posting images, and then cartoonists would do it. Also, there's lots of artists who post one panel a day on Instagram, and if you look every day, you're gonna eventually see the whole story or whole situation. I can't recommend one site over another, but I suggest you just start looking if you're interested. Yeah.
And I just like to mention too, the library has a webcomics web archive, which should not be that hard to find. I'm sorry I didn't put it in my list of resources, but I mean, you're not going to find as many there, but it's sort of sampling of web comics that have won awards and reflect underrepresented kinds of creators' works. And so I really encourage you to explore that. The serials division has spearheaded that archive.
Great. And I see Anne found it and has pasted it in the chat section.
Oh, great. Good.
Thank you. Michelle is wondering, were there many women artists working for the suffrage movement?
Oh, I have tried hard. One of the ones, two of the ones I showed today, Rose O'Neill and Ethel Plummer, both made pro-suffrage illustrations or cartoons, and some men were pro-suffrage too. But there's a whole book called Cartooning for Suffrage, and a lot of women who made wonderful pro-suffrage cartoons, and the book includes some that are anti-suffrage too. Can be found, and let me give you the title. I should be able to find this easily. Cartooning for Suffrage by Alice Shepard. And I consulted this book a lot when I was working on Drawn to Purpose, because I really hoped I'd find more. Since doing Drawn to Purpose, the library has acquired a wonderful collection of 167 original cartoon drawings by Nina Allender, who is considered possibly the major pro-suffrage cartoonist, who is a woman. And her work was published in The Suffragist, the weekly newspaper of the National Women's Party. And it was pretty influential. I mean, some of her cartoons were even reprinted in other newspapers across the country. I did some research. I am working on her. I'm working on doing some research on her and hope to, come up with an article, maybe another kind of presentation about her. So anyway.
Yeah. And we also had Allison Lang for a lecture earlier this fall talking about picturing political power, which wasn't so much cartoonists, but also some other wonderful visual representations of the suffrage movement.
Yeah.
So,
great question. Glad to hear it.
Definitely. Tom is wondering, do women artists have greater latitude than men to call out gender-related misrepresentations of females in historical art?
That's an interesting question. I can't think of any examples right off the bat, but well, I think in some of the pro-suffrage cartoons by Allender and by one of the other major ones, whose name is escaping me at the moment, who published in one of the major humor periodicals, some of them really did get fairly pointed about unequal treatment, about all the incredibly supportive work that women have done and were doing then, continue to do, and yet they were being denied the vote. If I think of the other cartoonist name, I'll let you know. I think that Allison mentions her in her book as well. I almost feel like grabbing it and looking it up for you.
And I think I'll just add, I mean, this question, it asks specifically greater latitude than men to call out gender related. I mean, it opens the question of representation. Who can represent who? Can a female artist talk about, some sort of men's problem? Can, if I'm a white American, can I write a novel about a Black South African? I mean, who has the right or the privilege of telling other people's stories? How is that done? And does it make it less relevant? I mean, is it? Anyway, I don't want to get off track, so we don't have very many minutes. But anyway, yeah, it's a question of representation. Who has the understood right to tell any particular story.
And I really do think early on, women in these fields were expected to do work that fit in fairly narrow parameters. Women cartoonists, for the most part, breaking into the comics industry, were expected mainly in the beginning to do comics about cute children and animals.
Mm-hmm.
And it took a while before they were able to handle other kinds of themes and subjects. And sorry about the phone. I couldn't control everything here.
No worries. It's real life.
And women
Everybody's on our
illustrators, early on in the golden age of illustration, many women illustrators, there were really a large number of women illustrators during the golden age who focused mainly on illustrating works of children's literature, short stories in magazines like St. Nicholas and books for children and so on.
Right.
So, I mean, I think it took a while. And I tried to show that.
Right. Nancy is wondering, the previous question you mentioned a cartoonist, first name Nina, who did cartoons in The Suffragist, and she just wanted to, she didn't hear the last name. What was the full name?
It's Allender, Allender. And the library has digitized some of her work. And you can see it. It's rights free, and you can see it. You can see even the higher resolution images of some of her cartoon drawings in the online catalog, which is at loc.gov/pictures. So
Thank you.
happy to see that. That took a while, that acquisition, but it's such a wonderful addition to the library's collections. And also papers from the National Women's Party were part of that acquisition.
Oh, lovely. Very nice. Linda is wondering what you can tell us about works from the time of the Spanish flu, polio, or other epidemics of the past.
Oh boy, I'm trying to think if I have found any about the Spanish flu. I mean, in the Library of Congress's collections, probably there's more in photography than, although there might be some cartoons. I mean, that's not something that I can speak to directly. About polio, Anne Mergen really was really concerned about the polio epidemic during her career. And she did a number of cartoons urging support for research, for possible cures and treatment. I mean, those are a couple of examples I can think of.
Phoebe, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I just immediately thought of Goya, who, you know, has illustrations and paintings from that era, including some of the Spanish flu, people afflicted with it. But
Oh, okay.
didn't he? I mean, I'm trying to verify what year that was, but I'm almost 100% sure of that. And surely there were others. It's not coming to mind immediately. Sorry.
Yeah, it's another thing that probably coming out of this pandemic will spur people to look back at some of those kinds of things as well.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, Gora Wortel. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, probably some other epidemic. It's not like there
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
of all the plagues throughout, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So, well, do either of you have any last minute comments or questions for each other before we end today?
I've got a question for Phoebe. It's probably pretty easy to answer, but I'm just curious. Do you have many more female students than male students in your classes?
Yes. But that is not unusual. For some reason, at the Stamp School of Art and Design at the University of Michigan, ever since I've been here 15 years, my students have been predominantly, in fact, all of our students in the School of Art and Design have been predominantly female. You know,
Wow,
typically
that's just,
there will be 1, 2, maybe 3 male students in any particular class. Yeah, it's kind
well,
of a,
I have found in my anecdotal kind of experience that that's the case at the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore. Their classes have been coming pretty regularly to visit our division and see displays and get introduced to our collections. Um, and it was just really striking to me, you know, that the number of, even over a few years, the number of female students has really increased. So,
right.
yeah,
And what does that mean? I'm not sure yet.
I don't know.
Yeah,
Could ask Linda Berry at the University of Wisconsin what, you
What
know,
her makeup
what
is.
her ratios are. I'd be
Yeah.
curious about that. Any,
oh yeah,
oh,
Paul.
at risk.
Mhm.
Interesting. Yeah. Wow.
Well, yeah,
Well,
that's something that we'll have to, it might take a little distance from it to know what it means, but we'll see
just,
in the
I'd
future.
like to thank all of you, Phoebe, for all your terrific comments and questions, and Angela and Anne. I enjoyed this and I really appreciated the opportunity to share.
It was wonderful, and you have a wonderful book, and thank you so much for that, Martha. It was wonderful to meet you, and Angela and Anne and Tracy.
And I want to learn more about you and your work, Phoebe. I feel badly that we haven't. I will look into that.
Okay. Thanks.
Yes. Thank you both so much for being here, and thank you so much for to all of our attendees for your good questions and comments and attention. And we hope that you learned something interesting today. I know I did. I love these sessions. So thanks everybody, and happy holidays. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.